Let's rank the championship odds of every single contender in the league, beginning unfortunately with the bottom tier. I'm sorry if you're a fan of one of these teams. Deep in your heart, you probably know that they aren't really contenders, but they're close enough to be included in this video. In the very bottom tier, in the D tier, we have Atlanta, we have the Knicks, and we have Toronto. Each of these teams are fine. They can look really good on a certain night. On occasion, they can beat some of the better teams in the league, and you could maybe somehow see a situation where Toronto, with all their great defensive wings, or New York with the addition of Josh Hart and how well Jalen Brunson has been playing, and Atlanta with the talent of Trae Young and the offense they have there, maybe there's a situation where, like Atlanta did a few years ago, you could get to the conference finals. And if you could kind of twist it in a way that you could maybe get to the conference finals, you have to be on the contenders list, but very clearly and very quickly, you're going to go in the bottom tier. Now let's go team by team. Next up in the C tier, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. There's a lot to like about Minnesota, especially once Karl-Anthony Towns comes back. There's a lot of talent on this roster, whether it be McDaniels, whether it be Edwards, whether it be Gobert, whether it be Cat. And offensively, if they can figure out the weird Gobert fit, there's a lot of things to like here. For me, unfortunately, the Western Conference is just absolutely loaded. I put a little bit more emphasis on that in this video in terms of teams trying to come out of the West, because it is going to be so tough. There are going to be teams that think that they are real, legitimate championship contenders, that feel like they have a chance to win the title, that are going to lose in the first round. And unfortunately for me, Minnesota is going to go in this C tier. They're just not quite on the same level as some of those Western Conference teams. Another team for me here is Brooklyn. I don't really know what to make of this roster here moving forward, but obviously it is not championship level. I think it's better than teams like Atlanta, New York, and Toronto, thus being up a tier. They've got a ton of different wings. They've got guys that can guard, and that's going to get you pretty far in the postseason. But obviously they don't have the star power that they used to have. And then the last team in the C tier, it saddens me to say, but it's the Sacramento Kings. They've had a great year. They're going to make the playoffs. They're going to have a successful season. They've got multiple All-Stars. They have a really good team. But when I really sit back and think about them playing against some of these other teams, again, in a very loaded Western Conference, in my mind, they're much more on the level of a team like Minnesota than some of the other teams that we're going to talk about here. I can't put them higher than this on this list. They're very good. They can certainly score, but in a postseason series, there's going to be some weird and some tough matchups for them. So unfortunately, they're going to go in the C tier. Next up now in the B tier, I did end up putting the LA Lakers. I don't really feel great about the Lakers' chances of actually winning a title, but again, you have to think about, okay, what are the odds they make it to the conference finals? What are the odds that they actually make it to the finals and win their conference? And if LeBron is healthy, and if Anthony Davis is healthy, and some of these trade deadline additions that they brought in, there is somewhat of a path here. There's always going to be just that little bit of fear of the Lakers that LeBron turns it on, AD's really good. We've seen each of these guys have MVP level stretches throughout the season, and if that happens to come together in the postseason, presuming they have to actually get to the postseason, I'm going to put them in this B tier. You can be mad at me if you want to about where Sacramento is in the standings compared to where the Lakers are in the standings, and then where they are relative to each other in this list. But when it really comes down to it, if they played each other in a postseason series, I would probably pick the Lakers. And as a result of that, they have to be, in my opinion, slightly ahead of them. And now, obviously, in this case, in an entirely new tier above Sacramento. Next up now in the B tier, this is our biggest tier, and you're going to start to see kind of a theme here. I have the Miami Heat. A lot of the theming here in terms of teams that are in the B tier is unproven. You could see it. You could see from a health standpoint, maybe they're a proven team or they just have a ton of talent, but it's still unlikely. And Miami is still one of those teams that, like, when they play Boston, when they play Milwaukee, when they play Philadelphia, all these other teams that are at the top of their conference, they look like they belong. They just have trouble staying healthy, and they have trouble with all of the other games that they play and beating bad teams on a night-to-night basis. I don't know if it's a focus issue. I don't know if it's a health issue, but whatever it is, Miami always seems to find a way to get that stuff figured out by the time they get to the postseason. They're always a dangerous playoff team. And again, compared to some of the other teams behind them and some of these other tiers, I would be more concerned about playing Miami than any of the other teams we've listed prior to in this video. Speaking of unproven teams, the next team now in the B tier is the New Orleans Pelicans. This was arguably the best team in the league to begin the season before everybody got hurt. And in games in which Zion and Brandon Ingram and all their guys have played, they've looked awesome. It's just so hard to go back to that and put them in the A or the S tier here because of all the injury issues. And we have no idea what it's going to look like if Zion's going to come back more than a few weeks before the postseason even begins. There's so many question marks with this team. But you know what else there is? A ton of talent. I can't put them lower than this tier because if you magically made them healthy and had them go up against a lot of the other teams we've mentioned in this video, they would probably be favorites. They're gigantic. They have a ton of depth. They have a ton of versatility. They're just missing their stars. And if those guys come together and get healthy in the postseason, I would be terrified, absolutely terrified of playing the Pelicans. And that just goes to show you again how deep this Western Conference is. Two teams left now in the B tier, and the next one is kind of similar to what I talked about with the Pelicans, and that is the LA Clippers. The talent is there. The health sometimes isn't. They've got a ton of depth. They've got a playoff proven coach in Ty Lue. This is another team that, like, they could lose in the first round in a 4-5 matchup, or they could make it to the conference finals, and I would believe either. This, though, to me, I didn't put them in this A tier, but this to me is the first team that really I could legitimately see them winning the entire thing. Like, not just, oh, they're in the conference finals, or oh, somehow they snuck into the finals. Like, I could close my eyes and envision a scenario where this roster is healthy and they end up winning the title. It's not a very high chance, but I do think it's at least relatively possible. Next up now, last team in this tier is the Dallas Mavericks, and this has everything to do with just the incredible amount of offensive talent that they have on the roster. In games in which Luka and Kyrie play together, even if they haven't won some games here to begin this stretch with them together, they are completely devastating and unstoppable offensively. Yes, they're missing some things defensively in terms of missing out on Dorian Finney-Smith. They're missing some things in terms of depth, and they're counting on a lot of younger guys to step into those roles. If you put those two guys, Luka and Kyrie, on the floor at the same time, especially at the end of games, it's going to be so difficult to stop. You better hope you have like a 5, 7, 9-point lead going in the last couple of minutes of a game, because those guys are going to be unbelievable at the end of games. And it just, that amount of offensive talent, that combination to me puts them right in this B tier with a lot of these other kind of unproven teams. Now we move on to the A tier, and this to me, these are legitimate finals contenders. These are teams you could see winning the title. They are in a completely different group than anybody else that we've mentioned so far. And first up in this group for me is going to be Memphis. I understand that they've had their struggles this year, and they've been they've really struggled without Steven Adams. They've had guys in and out of the lineup. I think last year a lot of people liked Memphis. They were this up and coming team, and now everybody's kind of soured on them this year. But just strictly in terms of talent, depth, versatility, I still think they're really, really good. I don't know that they're going to be the team to come out of the West again, just because it's such a difficult conference, but I do think they are a cut above every other team that we've talked about so far in this video. Next up now is a team that I will admit I have a soft spot for. I love this team, and it's the Cleveland Cavaliers. I truly believe that, especially as Isaac Okoro and some of their other wings start to play better, they have a legitimate chance to win the entire thing, just based strictly off the way that their team is set up, with an incredible amount of defense in the front line, an incredible amount of offense in the backcourt. And if you can figure out the wing, if Isaac Okoro can guard and shoot a little bit, Cedi Osman can guard and shoot a little bit in a postseason series, they have everything else you need. Because the important thing you have to understand about the postseason is that depth does matter a little bit less, and in minutes that really truly count, they're going to have two guys that can create their own shot for themselves and for others, and they have two guys in the front court in Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley that are going to be unbelievable in terms of their defensive ability, their versatility, all those different things. And yes, that wing spot, you're going to kind of have to go with the hot hand, but those four guys, minus the fifth guy, is one of the better starting lineups, one of the better lineups overall in the league, and they have the ability to give some of those guys rest throughout the games because they have interchangeability between Allen, Mobley, Mitchell, and Garland. I love Cleveland. I think they're a legit contender, an A-tier contender. Next up now is the Philadelphia 76ers. You might be surprised I don't have them all the way in the S tier, and if just strictly from how they're playing, talent standpoint, depth, all their different options, they are probably an S-tier team. However, when your coach is Doc Rivers and you're led partly by James Harden and you're going into the postseason, I have to be skeptical. It would be irresponsible to put them in the S-tier with some of these other teams, just given the playoff history of those two guys. That's all it comes down to. I could go ahead and go into this huge complicated analysis about how they play and how they match up with some of these other teams in the Eastern Conference. It just comes down to that. They're an S-tier team with a very spotty playoff history between Embiid's injury issues, Doc Rivers' failures, and James Harden's complete no-shows in the postseason, and as a result, they have to be in the A tier. And then finishing out the A tier is the Golden State Warriors. This might feel like I'm giving them a lot of credit for a team that's waiting on Steph to get healthy, for a team that hasn't been that good this year. I'm going to bank on the fact that when they are healthy, when Steph does come back, when they are whole, that this is the same team that literally just won the title. And yes, you can talk about their path to the finals and some of the issues that maybe they've had throughout this season, but I can't put them below the A tier. I can't put them with like Miami and the Clippers and the Mavs. Like, they are a tier above that, just based strictly off what we saw last year in the championship pedigree that this group has. If they're healthy, they're nearly as good as anyone else in terms of championship contention. And now we get to the S tier, the top tier contenders. We have two in each conference, beginning with the Boston Celtics, who have largely been the best team in the conference, or best team in the league, I should say, for the entire season. Despite a ton of injury issues, despite guys missing games left and right, they are an incredibly big team. They have a ton of size, ton of depth, ton of versatility. They have everything you want. They had one of the better offenses in the league in the beginning of the year, and then throughout the season, they've had one of the better defenses in the league. If fully healthy, again, just like Golden State, that's a team that just made the finals. There's no reason to think they can't contend this year. And the other team that's their counterpart in the Eastern Conference for me is Milwaukee. They had their struggles in the beginning of the year as well, while they're waiting on guys to get back from injury. But now, if they're whole, if they have Middleton, if they have Holiday, and they have Giannis, of course, they're going to be unbelievably difficult to beat. And you could argue that they would have made the finals last year if they were fully healthy. And the only reason Boston got by them is because of some of the injury issues they had. We have no indication this season that this team is going to be any different than the absolute world beaters they've been for the last couple of seasons. Going into the Western Conference, Conference, I have the Denver Nuggets in this top tier. I know that there's some flashier teams out there. I know there's some teams that made some bigger moves at the deadline, but the best team in the Western Conference for the entire season has been Denver. They have who probably should be the 3-time MVP in Nikola Jokic. Aaron Gordon's having an awesome season. Jamal Murray is getting better as the season goes along. As long as Michael Porter Jr., those guys are healthy, they're going to be so difficult to beat because of how unbelievable Jokic is. And again, those guys are going to play more minutes in the postseason. They have more options this year in terms of guys to play off of Jokic, guys like Bruce Brown, other players they brought in, now Reggie Jackson coming in as well. They are, to me, the cream of the crop, the very top tier in the Western Conference. And then the last team that is a bit of a wild card, but strictly from a talent perspective, I think has to be in this section is the Phoenix Suns. The addition of Kevin Durant to Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and Chris Paul, although there are concerns in terms of injuries and obviously trying to get all the pieces to fit together so quickly here down the stretch, to me, it just wouldn't look right to put them with that collection of talent in any of the other tiers. I would be terrified to play them. They're absolutely legitimate championship contenders. And those are my tiers. I feel like that's a pretty solid group of maybe they could win a round or two, maybe they could make the conference finals, they could certainly make the finals. And then the S tier, of course, these are true championship contenders at the very top level. Let me know down in the comment section below what you would have changed about this list. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.